Hey, I'm Alex Shoemaker, and in this episode of Shoemakes, I make a Final Fantasy VII Buster Sword wall clock for my office. To start, I grabbed the free plan set that Odin made over at his channel, Odin Makes. I'll include a link in the description to where you can download those plans if you wanted to do something like this for yourself. For this build, I had a couple goals in mind starting out. Firstly being, I really only wanted to use materials that I had on hand. I didn't want to have to go out and buy anything. The one exception to this would be the kit that I used to make the clock itself. Getting into the build, I start by breaking down my material to match rough dimensions measured off the plan set. To get the blade thickness, I laminated 2 1/4-inch panels of MDF together. While waiting for that glue to set up, I took detailed measurements from the plans to transfer to the crossguard, which I would then route out here. I purposely left this piece longer than the plan said so I could cut to fit and avoid any potential blowout that may occur during the routing. Once the glue up was finished, I moved back to the table saw where I could trim up the edges and get the final blade width. And here we have the basic shape of the sword laid out. I marked the center line of the crossguard so I can route out a slot for the blade to be inserted into. Back to the blade, I transfer over more markings from the plan, such as the blade's edge and the angle of the point. Here, I'm using a digital angle finder to get the angle of the end of the blade so that I can cut out on the table saw. Using my belt sander, I rough in the edge of the blade, which I'll further refine here with my orbital sander, finishing up with just a little bit of hand sanding. At this point, I cut the crossguard to its final dimensions. I mark out on the crossguard the location of some of the additional details that will go onto the sword, such as these little round buttons that span the length of the crossguard. Finishing it up a little bit, I'm able to then glue and insert each of the little round buttons in. At this point, I'm able to insert the grip into the crossguard. I noticed that it needed a little bit more drilling out now to fit the button, so I go ahead and take care of that here. finished off the rest of the grip's details by looking around the shop and finding various pieces that I could use to help add those details onto it. With some of the major elements of the blade now laid out, I go ahead and mark the location of where I'll put the clock. Measuring the diameter of that clock shaft with an appropriate drill bit, I'm able to drill that out and have a slot for where the clock will poke through the blade. However, to have room for the clock's mechanism, I needed to mark out a space that I'll route out. And now the mechanism fits. At this point, we're able to do the final glue up for the blade, crossguard, and grip. I knew when routing out the slot for the blade in the crossguard, it wasn't going to have a tight fit. And so here, with the gaps, I'm going to fill it using some Bondo. With the Bondo partially cured, I'm able to cut away some of the excess to help save on the sanding later. And here we have the gaps filled and smooth. With the sword assembled, I'm able to move on to some of the more finer detail work. I go back to the plans and cut out all the various panel sections on styrene sheets that I had. For this main section of paneling detail, I used some spray adhesive to glue the plans to my sheet of styrene, and then just slowly worked and cut each panel piece, numbering them as I went. And here I'm able to glue those pieces onto the blade. The last part of this build focuses on how to hang the clock on a wall. I use some scrap wood that will offset the clock from the wall, and then will serve as a point where I can route in special slots that can be used with appropriate hanging hardware. And this is that router bit I'll use for the hanging hardware holes. And here you can see those slots routed out that will be used on the back of the clock to hang it on a wall. With the main build complete, I can move on to finishing. The first step I need to do is to seal the MDF so the paint will be able to go on more smoothly. With the blade primed, I'm able to airbrush on some of the other paint colors. I started off with a gunmetal, but feel that the gunmetal is a little too silvery, so I kind of back it off with a black here. I also use this as an opportunity to paint the hands of the clock gold to stand out from the blade. Using some painter's tape, I mask off the portion that I want to remain black, so then I can come back and airbrush on some silver to represent the blade's edge. With the base colors painted on, I'm able to move on to some of the highlights and weathering. I start by dry brushing some silver onto the raised details, and then highlight further using some silver rub and buff. With some of the highlights taken care of, I move on to my washes. I start with a black acrylic wash, watered down, that I will then rub off with a paper towel here to give it a kind of a dark, grimy look. Moving on to the grip, I didn't have anything on hand that would work perfectly for a leather wrap, so I ended up using some red craft foam that I had. So using these strips of foam, I super glued it onto the grip and slowly wrapped it around. I had to use multiple strips since the sheet of foam I had was not long enough. Like the blade, I applied a wash onto the leather grip to really give it a nice dark, worn look. And after applying a satin clear coat to it to kind of protect the paint, I'm able to add the clock mechanism. I apply a small dab of hot glue to secure it in there, and then it's just a matter of screwing on and attaching the clock hands to the now face of the Buster Sword clock. Hey, so thanks for watching that build video and hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making this project. Originally, I was actually contemplating doing the full-size Buster Sword, but honestly, I didn't really feel like making a 6-foot-long sword, so I thought I'd compromise and make a little functional clock for my office. So, again, thank you for watching this video, and hope I see you again sometime.